Hello, good afternoon to you. I want to talk about this new Hate Crime and Public Order Scotland Act, to give it its full title, which came into effect yesterday. This is a law that creates a new crime of stirring up hatred, quotes, stirring up hatred, relating to particular protected characteristics. I'll tell you what those characteristics are. Age, disability, religion, sexual orientation, transgender identity, or being intersex, now classed as a criminal offence if you stir up hatred related to those subjects. Now, those who have criticised this new act, one of the things that they criticise it for is that stirring up hatred against women, which we know happens a lot. I experience it rather a lot myself as a woman who's live on air every day for 3 hours. I had a fair bit of it over the weekend. Stirring up hatred relating to women is not in the Act. But the First Minister, Humza Yousaf, has said that that is expected to be dealt with in a separate Act on misogyny. So we'll see whether that comes to fruition. We don't have a hate crime called misogyny in this country, as in, dealt with criminally in the way that a hate crime related to race, for example, would be. But the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, waded in on this today, supporting J.K. Rowling's criticism, the author J.K. Rowling's criticisms of Scotland's new hate crime law. And I was listening very carefully to James's conversation with you about it earlier on. And I come at it from a similar but slightly different angle, looking at slightly different elements to it. But you and I can talk about that in a few minutes. First of all, I want to speak to Susan Smith, co-director of For Women Scotland. That's a group of women from across Scotland working to protect and strengthen women and children's rights. And I'm also joined by Jenny Ann Bishop, trans activist and founder of a support group called Unique. Good afternoon to you both.
Hello.
Susan, first of all, what's wrong with this law, in your view?
Well, you've covered one of the things that's very wrong with it, in that it doesn't protect women. Sex was a key recommendation of Lord Brackerdale. He felt that there was a massive gap there, and we believe that to be the case. We don't really understand the arguments that were put forward for excluding it, especially as that could have still been done alongside a wider look at whether there were gaps in the law regarding misogyny. But the stirring up offences part is incredibly vague, actually, and a lot of people have very different ideas about what is covered, including, rather disturbingly, the police, who have got rather inadequate training. The chair of the Police Federation says it's not fit for purpose. So there's massive concerns that we're going to see this rush of people to report others for things that they might have said on Twitter or for opinions that they don't like. And I imagine that most of these reports will end up being thrown out in court. But the problem is that when you are investigated by the police, and the police have said they will investigate every report, you will find that your life is raked over, your equipment is taken away from you, you lose your laptop, which you might rely on your mobile phone, and you'll be put to a lot of distress and expense for possibly 18 months or 2 years before the situation resolves.
So in summary, you think women should have been included in that list of protected characteristics, as in being female.
Yeah.
And you think free speech is at risk and could involve people being essentially dragged through the courts unnecessarily because of that.
Absolutely, yes. And there's a carve-out for religion. Actually, there were greater protections given for free speech around religion. So the Act explicitly says that ridicule, antipathy and dislike do not count for the purposes of whether or not something is a crime. But those carve-outs aren't there for the other characteristics. So that leads one to infer it's possible that if you ridicule, antipathy and dislike could be enough to trigger the threshold for crime.
Jenny Ann Bishop, why do you support the law?
I think it is a good balance. I have to agree that it would have been better to include sex, particularly women, as a part of the Act. But I'm confident that the Scottish Government is going to include women. And indeed, sometimes men are attacked too. So sex should be a protected characteristic as it is under the Equality Act, I don't think that under this Act people will be prosecuted for trivial offences or for where they express a view. It's where you go on and stir up hatred or incite violence against protected people. And I have to say, why would people want to stir up hate or violence against other minorities? Are we not civilized people?
Yeah, well, no right-minded person would. It's a question of whether we all agree on what stirring up hatred is. I think that's central to this, isn't it, Jenny Ann?
Stirring up hatred is when you put offensive remarks on the social media, and it then results in thousands of people piling on somebody else with things like death threats. That surely is stirring up hatred. And I'll say again, why in a civilized country would you want to do that?
Susan Smith, come back on that.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Sheila. It's different perceptions. And to be quite honest, nobody has the right not to be offended. And some people out there will tell you that some of the things that
Jenny Ann wasn't talking, forgive me, Jenny Ann wasn't talking about offence there, was she? She was talking about being hated on.
Well, yes, but I mean, this is as we get back to, women get this all the time. We get so much misogynistic comments, especially on the internet. And this idea that some people can go now and report women, groups of women or individual women, like, for example, J.K. Rowling, because we're stating biological facts, is absolutely, it's dystopian, frankly.
Go on, Jenny Ann, come in. Yeah.
There are two massive errors there. Firstly, it's not about trivial remarks or stating your beliefs. It's when you go further and stir up hatred. And yes, I'm absolutely against hatred against anybody, including women. And also, it is covered in a number of the acts, and it will be much more widely covered under the new Scottish legislation. I still don't understand why anyone would want to stir up hate. I mean, I have lots and lots of friends who know I'm a trans woman, and they don't hate me or try to stir up hate against me. Some of them may disagree. And anyway, sex cannot be individually defined as male or female. There is a huge range of sex characteristics.
Well, gender can't be, but biological sex can be, Jenny Ann.
No, it can't be. If you look into the way that sex is in a way diverse throughout nature, including the human population, unless you've had your genome sequenced and your internal organs scanned, nobody can define exactly where they are on the...
Well, let Susan Smith come back in on that.
Well, I don't think that, obviously this isn't particularly relevant to the hate crime bill, but this is part of the problem. I mean, I find that view laughable and unscientific. It's flat earthism. And of course, there are only two...
Hang on, Jenny Ann, I'll come back to you, promise.
There are only two sexes there's only one pathway for sexual reproduction in humans and in most of nature. We are not sequential hermaphrodites. There are a tiny number of people, 0.018% of the population, who have a different sex development, but that they are still male or female. They are not a third sex. And most of the people who claim to be I'm sure your other guest is as well, belongs to a sex category that produces small gametes, that are male, that have a perfectly normal sex
but doesn't stop Jenny Ann living the way she wishes, yeah?
No, absolutely not. It does not stop anybody from living the way they wish. But it shouldn't stop me being allowed to say that as a woman, there are areas and spaces and services that I want to be protected, and I want to be female only.
Jenny Ann?
No, nobody is saying you can't say that. And by the way, how do you know I'm not an intersex woman? Why have you taken that view?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I suppose, do you have Swire syndrome? Do you have congenital...
you did say you were a trans woman, Jenny Ann, at the beginning.
Yeah.
Well, some intersex people identify as both intersex and trans, like my daughter does, for instance, who was born an intersex child.
I do think this is getting rather away from the point of the hate crime legislation, and I do think this is a problem that
can I come in on that? Because that's where...
Well,
let me come in on that, if I may, because this is where the conversation with the listeners, after I've said thank you and goodbye to both of you, comes in, because I think it is the zone in which the questions around whether it's hate or not is exactly in places like this. So I, for example, Susan, coincidentally, would err on the side of agreement with you about biological sex. Not so with Jenny Ann. With great respect, Jenny Ann, I don't agree with you, but you said yourself that's, we can disagree. We can disagree agreeably, and I hope we can. But is there a danger in this? This is to you, Jenny Ann. Is there a danger in this act that were I to say to somebody, look, I don't believe you are a biological female, and I don't want you to be in the same, let's say I'm saying it to a teenage boy, I don't want you to be in the same Girl Guide tent as my 13-year-old daughter. Is that hatred, or is that me protecting my child from a possibility? How would you see that, Jenny Ann?
You're at perfect liberty to say that, and under the Act, you would not be prosecuted. It's where you go on and try and incite hatred.
Which I would never do.
People. That's where the Act comes in.
Although, Susan, have we seen examples where somebody stating a fact similar to, making a statement similar to the one I just said, has found themselves in trouble? Maybe not criminal trouble yet, but employment, for example, losing employment. We've seen cases where that's happened, haven't we?
Oh, yes, definitely. And we have seen people reported to the police. J.K. Rowling's already been reported to the police. We've got trans activists.
Well, she did literally invite it over the weekend, didn't she, herself?
Well, she did, yes.
Come and arrest me.
Even before that. Yeah. But we've got some trans activists in Scotland who've been posting on social media that they've reported named individuals to the police. They're very pleased about this. And all for just things that they've said about sex being real and so on Twitter. And we've had women arrested for putting stickers up. We've had women who had visits from the police for talking women's rights are not a hate crime. This is even before this act came into force. And I think this is the problem, that we don't, when people say stirring up hatred, we don't know what that means.
Well, and on that,
would say, sorry.
No, let me just, I must give Jenny Ann the last word because I began with you, Susan. Jenny Ann, on that, Hamza Yusuf has said, and the law itself says, this is about reasonable people interpreting action. But it's not always interpreted reasonably, is it? As we have seen with women who have lost their jobs, gone to tribunal, and in case after case after case after case, been found to have been unfairly dismissed. So there are free speech fears around this. Do you think they're legitimate?
Well, obviously people have the right to question things, but I am quite sure that this new law has got the right balance, because I'm pretty sure that if people are just reported for stating their opinions, they will not fall foul of this act. It's where it goes the next step and incites hatred, particularly where somebody who's got a huge following and therefore has some responsibility over what they say, and then we find that what they're saying incites other people to come and threaten.
Well, we haven't seen evidence yet of that, but thank you very much indeed, Jenny Ann. Jenny Ann Bishop, trans activist, founder of the support group called Unique, and thanks to Susan Smith, co-director of For Women Scotland. That's a group of women from all over Scotland working to protect and strengthen women and children's rights.